Okay, so talking about diabetes, could you give us an overview of your post-diabetic program and what inspired you to create it?
11 years ago, I had my business clients asking me quite regularly for health advice because they saw me as an example. I was traveling around the world. I don't get sick. I got lots of energy. I'm on stage 10, 15 hours a day, making things happen. And so I started doing that. And immediately I was frustrated because I would share really good principles and people wouldn't change. And so I decided to create a program based on our behavioral change dynamics model that was similar to the business programs we were teaching. So not just educational, but transformational. And I launched that program for 8 people and it worked really well. And then another 8 and another 8. And then the word of mouth just took off. And the next thing you know, we've got people all over the world and it's fantastic. Now, a side effect of that is we start hearing about the results from people. And the results are everything from, hey, my sex drive is back. We had a baby we were never thinking we were going to have. I lost 35, 45, 55 pounds. My inflammation is gone. I mean, we're hearing all kinds of phenomenal stories, very heartwarming. One of the most common ones we were hearing is, my doctor's a little confused because I'm no longer diabetic. Or, my doctor's a little confused because now I'm pre-diabetic. And that really bothered me because if you were type 2 diabetic and now you're not type 2 diabetic, I don't think it's a good idea to call you pre-diabetic because pre has a built-in hypnotic suggestion of toward, you're heading towards something. Also, though, on a more direct level, if somebody is formerly diabetic and they've recovered sufficiently that their numbers are similar to a pre-diabetic, but they are trending in the other direction, they should receive different medical advice. Therefore, they have a different medical condition. And so we decided to start calling that post-diabetic. And then we said, but even once you've returned your blood sugar back to the normal or say non-diabetic range, you are still post-diabetic. Because we're not talking about a cure, we're talking about a reversal. And if you ever were type 2 diabetic, then you've shown a predisposition for developing the condition if you aren't very careful. And so when we help somebody reverse their type 2 diabetes, the minute they've recovered to the point of free diabetes, we consider that post-diabetic, and they stay post-diabetic basically for the rest of their lives, which as a reminder of stay on track. It's not about rigidity, it's just reminding them that, hey, there are certain things that get you in trouble and certain things that don't.
Okay.
So, that, and then actually where the book came from is really fascinating. The book came from, a guy, I show up one morning and have a Zoom meeting with somebody I don't know, and his name is Ruben Ruiz. And he starts telling me his story. And he says, well, about 3 months ago, I was in a car accident. I was so tired. I stopped off at Starbucks. I picked up a coffee and I still fell asleep. And that happened again that week. So 2 car accidents in a week. But then he says, listen, I was 40 pounds overweight, I was type 2 diabetic, I was hypertensive, and I was on 10 prescription medications. And then he says, and the really hard part about all this is that I'm a doctor. I have 3 medical clinics. I used to be an assistant professor of medicine. I spent many years as an internist. I mean, and he says after the 2 car accidents, he just didn't feel like he could be a doctor anymore. Like, it just felt almost never mind the Hippocratic oath. What about the hypocritical one? And so but then he went online and he found one of our programs and he did it. And 90 days later, he'd lost 40 pounds. He was no longer type 2 diabetic. He was no longer hypertensive, and he was off 9 of his 10 prescription medications. It took a few months to get off that 10th medication. And so then he contacted me and said, we have to get this message out to the world. And it was on that basis that we wrote the book together. And then we went on then to, develop diabetes reversal programs specifically.
So what makes the post-diabetic program different from other diabetes management and reversal programs available?
Okay, well, there's a clue in exactly your question. The answer is built into the question. What makes your reversal program different than most of the diabetes management programs? Right there is the difference. We're not talking about managing it. Managing it is the way largely the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry approach diabetes right now is you manage it. Oh, you're diabetic? Okay, we can manage that.
With insulin.
Yeah, we can manage it with metformin, insulin, or any number of other pharmaceutical interventions and light instructions as to how you might improve your lifestyle to some degree with this pamphlet that you're never going to read. So that's management. And I'm not suggesting there aren't management programs that create some benefit, but I was reading of one, and I won't out the country or the system, but I was in a country that has effectively a form of universal healthcare, and I was reading one of their pamphlets for their diabetes management program, and they were so unbelievably proud that their program had showed a 2-point improvement in A1C measurement over a year of being on the program. So now you have somebody with an A1C of 8 and they move down to an A1C of 6. Well, that's great. That's fabulous. But what we know from our preclinical trials, and we're now in the clinical trial phase, but we know that we took 90% of the people out of the diabetic range in 3 months. Never mind 50%, 2 points, right? Like, this is a big deal. And so that's the difference between focusing on reversal and focusing on management. Now, I do believe that the management of type 2 diabetes is something that does have to happen once someone is post-diabetic. Now you have to manage it. But once somebody's post-diabetic, you don't have to manage it with medication. You manage it with your lifestyle.
How does the program address what, when, and why we eat? What impact do these dietary changes have on the body's metabolism?
So let's go back to the evolution gap. If we want to look at any particular challenge that we're facing, the idea is to look at that challenge and say, well, why didn't that challenge exist before? Why didn't it really exist? Or when did that challenge begin? So if we look at say, let's look at cavities for a moment. What's the deal? Did God or evolution give us bad teeth and now we get cavities? Like, what's going on? So we can look at the history and we can see that, in the fossil history, cavities existed for a long time, but they only really took off after agriculture was developed. Sometime after agriculture, now cavities start to become a regular feature in the archaeological record, as does bone disease and that sort of thing. So you can see there that the advent of agriculture, which clearly had its advantages, had a disadvantage. And the disadvantage was that we were now growing, say, a carbohydrate-based bacteria in our mouth that was devastating our teeth. Great. Now let's do something about that. So if we take that same thought process to diabetes, we can say, okay, well, when did it begin? Now, we don't know for sure when it began, but we do know that even the Romans understood it. They would line up a bunch of soldiers on the sand and make them pee into the sand, and then they would mark the little wet spots, and then they would know, based on the ants' behavior, whose urine had too much sugar in it. And they could see this person's not metabolizing sugar well in that. So they knew. And by the way, you're from Sweden. Can you translate what is diabetes called in Swedish? Tell me the Swedish word.
There are 2 words. The English word, diabetes, and the other word is sockersjuka, which means sick of sugar.
Exactly. If we go to Holland and if we go to the Netherlands and we ask them what's their word, they'll say sugar sickness. If we go to Estonia and we ask them, they'll tell you sugar sickness. It's been known about for a very, very long time, and that sugar definitely played a role in the whole thing. And so I would argue that if we the single biggest contributing factor is that humans evolved the ability to survive and utilize seasonal fluctuation. We have 3 different metabolic modes. We can burn sugar, we can burn fat, we can burn protein, and we're able to burn those different fuel sources because Mother Nature used to change up the food supply on us. So we needed to be able to process what was available and prepare for the seasons when nothing was available. Then what happens is that, well, let me put it another way. Imagine that you take a bear from British Columbia, Canada, who's fattening up for the winter and preparing for hibernation. Well, how is that bear doing that? Well, they're eating lots of berries and eating lots of honey and fattening up. But what would happen to that bear if we left them in a forest that was only ever in autumn? Right? Like the bear never went to winter, didn't do the hibernation thing, and just lived in autumn. That bear would become obese and diabetic. I mean, that's what would happen, or something close to that anyway. And so I would argue that the same thing happened to us, is that we left the ecosystem, we left the balance of Mother Nature or whatever. And when we left that, our sugar management system got thrown out of whack. And so, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and these things are the result of that. So what we do with our clients is not only teach them about nutrition and help them change their relationship with food, but we guide them carefully through the process of metabolic reset. How do you control your metabolism for optimal function? You're running a marathon, this is the metabolism you should be running. You're studying for exams, this is the metabolism. You're trying to get pregnant, this is the metabolism you should be running in. And we show them how to make those switches. And of course, that's absolutely key to losing weight, releasing weight, and also correcting your blood sugar.
This was just one episode. There's so much more to discover. Check out the full podcast series, subscribe for future episodes, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.